What is up, everybody? Welcome into this latest edition of Warchant TV's coverage of Transfer Portal 2025/2026. I'm Aslan Hajavandi, joined by managing editor of Warchant.com, Ira Schofel. Come join us over at Warchant.com. Lots to discuss, lots of things to react to, and now the portal popping for the Noles. There's been a couple players, Ira, that have entered. Edwin Joseph, though, a name that dropped late. It's not late in the morning on Wednesday. It's afternoon now as we sit here and talk about this, Ira. But Edwin Joseph, a defensive back, homegrown guy. They recruited him out of high school, developed him, had really nice PFF numbers here of late. But the latest player from Florida State to enter the transfer portal, and by far the most impactful one.
Yeah, I think since late last week, we're probably up to, I don't know, 8 or 9, somewhere in that ballpark. But mostly it's been younger guys that have not played yet at Florida State and probably were not major factors in the plans this season. And so as kind of we've all come to a custom, if guys don't get on the field in the first couple of years, a lot of times they start looking elsewhere. They want to get on the field and they might have opportunities to make NIL money and rev share money somewhere else. But Edwin Joseph is a big piece. And like you said, he was one of the starting safeties, kind of the nickel corner of the safeties. And, had really been kind of I don't say a project, but like kind of somebody they've invested a ton of time and effort into. Like Mike Norvell really liked Edwin Joseph coming out of high school down there at Hollywood Chaminade. And he's, was a big time prospect. And, he's one of those guys that kind of came in a little rough around the edges, and they had to work with him to kind of get him in line with the program, and seemed to have done that. We heard so many good things going back to last spring about how much he bought in, and he was ready to kind of assume a starting role, and he did that this season. And now he's heading out the door. It was kind of a rocky season, though. Like you said, the PFF numbers were pretty good, but he did have the little incident kind of on the sideline with Mike Norvell in one game. And, so he's moving on. I don't know if has anything to do with Patrick Surtain leaving, the secondary coach, but it's a significant loss, but not necessarily like a crushing loss, because, nobody on this team probably could be considered a crushing loss, right?
Yeah, fair. I think Joseph did rank top 10 in tackles for Florida State this past season, played in all 12 of the games, 37 total tackles, 3.5 TFLs. He had 3 picks, Edwin Joseph. I can't even remember one of them, and 5 breakups. But yeah, I mean, this was a player, Ira, that going into the season, there was relatively high expectations on as well, because he was within the top 25 of the Warchant preseason top 40. He actually was right at number 25. So he was behind Quindarius Jones, though. They didn't have Quindarius Jones all season long, but I think every team could use an Edwin Joseph. I mean, I don't know the off-the-field stuff that happened after that Stanford penalty, if that's the kind of thing that, most teams would welcome. I don't know how big of a deal it really was, Ira, but I think any team like in the playoff would be like, yeah, we could use a guy like that, at least for depth purposes and not emergency depth purposes. I think he would be in a rotation for a lot of teams. He's a talented player. I didn't have him on my top 40, and that was my bad. Like I definitely think he was one of the most top 25 most impactful players this past season. Would you agree?
Yeah, no question. And he, and again, I think that's probably my guess is the fact, again, from where he came from. When he first got to Florida State as a freshman, there were talk behind the scenes that, there were concerns about whether or not he'd last in the program, just in terms of following all the things that they wanted him to get done, both academically and just off the field, just, meeting all the responsibilities, as they say, of being a Florida State student athlete. And so there were questions about that. And, and again, I think a lot of times the head coach and the coaching staff maybe reach out to a guy like that. They see the potential and they really want to invest in them and try to help them see through it. And they did that. And he came through the other side. That's why it was kind of, I think, frustrating for Mike Norvell to have the incident during the season where, Edwin Joseph got called for being offsides on a field goal. Then he gives up the touchdown. Then Mike Norvell starts yelling at him, and they kind of have a dust up on the sideline. They went at it. Went at each other. It was probably one of the more pronounced, episodes. I think Mike Norvell compared when we asked him about it later. He said, "Well, there was an incident, a couple of years ago where I got onto a guy on the sideline, and it was seen as a positive thing. That was the situation, I think, with Deuce Spann, but Deuce Spann wasn't going back at him, from what I remember. It was Mike Norvell kind of getting in his face, and Edwin Joseph was going back at Norvell. So it was kind of a negative seen. But then he did come back and play better in that game, and they made some plays down the stretch. Did he might have the pick in the Florida game? I think he might.
He did. Yeah. The tip pick. Yeah, that was him. That game. So yeah, Florida looks like week 7 and then 5. So Pitt and Virginia. So I mean, in some big time moments, he showed up there for sure. To your point though, I mean, that thing happens against Stanford, right? And then listen, I mean, look at that. Like he starts the next game, the game after that, the game after that. Doesn't start against NC State, but that 57 snaps, that's a huge number. And then he starts obviously against Florida. So it kind of underscores again the point that this was an impactful piece. And I think it hurts. I mean, it's a net negative. We'll see though, again, obviously as the portal officially opens up on January 2nd, but as we see these names starting to trickle, as the days wane on, Ira, it seems like we're going to see more impactful guys, not only leave Florida State, but other programs, which gives opportunity for Florida State to reload.
Yeah, and I think the other situation first, real quick before we move on to that is, we do have. It's hard to know exactly who's going to fill that spot. Usually, when we do these things, maybe we might look at the players who played this past season. And again, they had a lot of safeties that were. Some of them were interchangeable. KJ Kirkland and some of those other guys in the secondary. But to your point, we don't exactly know who's all going to be returning. As we said already, there's probably 8 to 10 players that have gone into the portal for Florida State or planning to. The portal doesn't actually open till January 2nd, but up to 8 to 10 of them have already kind of either they've been informed that they need to leave, or they've informed the coaching staff that they plan on leaving. And so, there's going to be more of that. The meetings, Mike Norvell said that he just started his exit interviews with players on Friday. I think that probably continued, and now guys are kind of making their own decisions. And I mean, it's hard to know exactly what that depth chart's going to look like until we know who's all coming and who's staying.
Yeah. He was one of your best defensive backs, though, so that's something they're going to have to probably address, because I don't know if I know they got some younger guys like Kai Bates and Charles Lester. Are they ready to step into those sort of significant roles? Not 100% sure. We'll see how it all goes. But speaking of defensive backs, Ira, not the only news of somebody leaving, but apparently somebody coming forth to help out the coaching cavalry at Florida State. Pete Thamel reported first that Brandon Harris, longtime assistant coach, he was here at Florida State back in 2020 as an assistant, looks to be poised to accept the defensive backs job. I guess the cornerbacks job that was left open when Patrick Surtain was dismissed last week.
Yeah, and he's a familiar face certainly a familiar face around the FSU program, and probably a familiar name to some FSU fans because he was on Mike Norvell's first staff. He was a defensive analyst when Mike Norvell's first staff came in for a year, and then he left and got an on-the-field coaching job, and it looks like he'll be coming back to be the cornerbacks coach. And he's the brother of Tim Harris Jr., FSU's receivers coach. They're both the sons of Tim Ice Harris, the longtime legendary high school coach in South Florida. It's interesting in the sense that, you go to a guy that probably has a better feel for this coaching staff because his brother's on the staff, and he's a guy that he had been most recently at UCF. So they probably have a lot of common connections, but also it seems to be that they're kind of trending to a younger assistant coaching staff, maybe a heavier recruiting focused assistant coaching staff. And we'll address this kind of more as time goes on. But, the defensive ends coach that looks like they're bringing in, is it Nick Williams?
Yes.
I believe his name is,
Correct.
He's a younger guy known as a recruiter. So now you've got another guy that's Brandon Harris is known as a really good recruiter. One of the names floating out around there for running backs coach is a guy named Cam Martin,
Yep.
Another younger guy. So, as Florida State, we talked so much about the needs to get better in the front office and the scouting and recruiting departments. Looks like maybe they're also starting to trend that way on the assistant coaching staff. Not that Pat Surtain was an older guy, but he was not, this age in terms of, kind of young, hungry, up and coming assistant coaches. So I think that might be part of it as well.
Ira, I don't mind the hire of Brandon Harris. Sounds like he's got some really good bona fides. Obviously, as you mentioned, good pedigree with his dad being such a legend in the state. His brother's here on staff. I don't know. I mean, at worst, I feel like it's probably a wash with what Surtain was. But to me, this just feels like both of these coordinators seem to be taking a much more, right. I don't know, sort of control of their side of the ball, and maybe even kind of the program in certain aspects where you're getting rid of a guy like Surtain, who is well-liked, well-regarded, and you're bringing in, Brandon Harris, brother of a guy that's already on staff. Sounds like, again, Cam Martin, as you mentioned, that's a guy that played for Gus Malzahn in Auburn. So, everyone just seems to be reinforcing and bringing in more of their guys, which I don't know how to really interpret, because it felt like they were probably ready to turn the page on, or at least a lot of people on the outside are ready to turn the page on at least one side of the football.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sure we'll be doing a whole lot more videos on the coaching situation as this all unfolds, because we don't know for sure. But Brandon Harris sounds like that's definitely happening. Yeah. We don't know yet for sure on Cam Martin. But, I think that you're right. I think that last year when they made the changes at the coordinator level and they brought in a couple of assistants on each side of the ball to kind of go in line with what they wanted. Tony White brought in 2 assistants from Nebraska. Gus Malzahn brought in 2 assistants with him from UCF. And, they try to make it work with some of the existing guys. And now it looks like, as you said, they're kind of maybe getting more guys comfortable with those coordinators and getting more guys comfortable on the staff, the new staff, kind of compared to mixing the old staff and the new staff. And, we'll see if it works. I don't know. To your point, I don't think a lot of it. I think most FSU fans at this point are ready for anything new other than maybe Patrick Surtain. That was one guy I think that probably had a positive approval rating on the staff, one of the few, and he's out. But in general, I think most people are on board with something new, and this clearly makes it seem like Gus Malzahn is staying. We already got the impression Tony White was definitely staying. Mike Norvell was not committal about either of those on Friday, but it seems pretty clear that those 2 coordinators are staying, and now they're kind of building up a staff around them with who they want, and not necessarily just who Mike Norvell wants on his staff.
I don't want to make this like a total program check-in, but I have you here, Ira, so I'm sure people want to know. But you've been talking about this. I think you mentioned on headlines. I was listening to it earlier today, just about maybe this focus on younger guys that might be better evaluators, better recruiters. The fact they are going in that direction and they have not made any changes at GM, although we did see a report out there that maybe UCLA is targeting Derek Ray. Do you think that perhaps this notion of a GM coming in that was going to oversee everything, that might be less of a probability, a likelihood, since they seem to be going after making coaching changes first and foremost?
No, I get the impression that's still happening. And I think.
But will they still have a really like an oversized role, which I think a lot of people want?
That part, I don't think it's going to be what we, when they first started talking about hiring a new GM, the kind of the options were, right now they have a general manager of personnel. That's Derek Ray. And so his role is very limited. It's just basically over the scouting department and the recruiting department. And then there were basically going to be 2 other options. If you wanted to hire a GM, you could just do that, or you could hire somebody that's got real autonomy over the roster, kind of just in terms of really controlling NIL for players, coming and going, who's going in the portal, really kind of have that position, basically put the roster in place, and then Mike Norvell oversee the coaches who go coach the team that they're given. Then there's the thought of a GM who actually oversees the entire operation. I definitely got the impression last week, and I included in something I wrote, that I didn't think they were ready to go that route. So it's going to be more of probably a hybrid of the first 2. I think this new GM, when it's named, and it could be named at any minute, we could be back on a video here soon, Aslan. But my impression is that person's going to be more power and oversight of the recruiting operation in terms of more autonomy, but probably not total control of the roster. I think it'll be more working with Mike Norvell, a little bit more hand in hand, and just a fresh perspective, and maybe somebody who's got a different perspective. Derek Ray was a guy who was a younger personnel guy that Mike Norvell hired, really liked him. But you always felt like Mike Norvell was calling the shots there. Derek Ray was kind of doing what he wanted. I think if you get a more experienced, older person that's got more just knowledge and connections, maybe that becomes more of a symbiotic relationship. So that's what I'm expecting, but we don't know for sure until that person's named.
All right. We all convene here to talk about Edwin Joseph, the latest entry into the portal for Florida State. Here's the list of players. It started on the 4th. Jaden Parrish, L.A. Jesse Harold, Mario Nash Jr., Luke Douglas, Tylen Coleman, Jamori Flagg, Jalen Lucas, another name that entered on Wednesday, Ira, which I found a little bit interesting because he has shown the ability to be a playmaker whenever he has had these limited sort of opportunities. I don't know, David Johnson leaving to Arkansas. I don't know if maybe he follows him there or just how that all kind of works out. But that seems like Lucas and Joseph, today has been the first real day that, Florida State, you kind of maybe wince a little bit when you see a name entering the portal.
Yeah, and Jalen Lucas is one of those guys. I think it'll always be kind of a what could have been. We were so excited when we saw him. First of all, what he did in the return game, he was a special teams All-American at Indiana, and then what we saw from him when he got to campus, and then he had the really bad knee injury early in his first season, and then he came back healthy this year, and we're thinking, okay, now he's going to be a big part of the offense, and it looked like early in the season maybe that was going to come to fruition. And then it just seemed like he fell out of the rotation and he just didn't get a lot of carries, didn't get a lot of attempts. So my guess is that's more him deciding, hey, I'm going to go try to find a place where I'll get used more. But it just didn't materialize for him there. I still think he's a talented kid, super quick, super athletic, could be a factor. We thought Gus would find a way to use him. It just didn't really happen. And he was a real likable guy. So hopefully he'll find a better home.
As you were talking, I hit refresh. Our guy, Matt Lassere, keeping that thread replenished. Willie Suarez, Christian White, two other players that were formerly walk-ons, but obviously part of your 105 in the post-house settlement world have also entered the portal there. So lots going on. Check out warchant.com. You can join for $1 for a week. That'll take you, that'll whet your appetite just enough of what's going on in the portal. Coaching hires, maybe a GM hire. We'll see how it all goes. Get access to everything on the On3 network, and you get a year subscription to The Athletic. Not a bad Christmas gift, everybody, to start things off. It's $1. Treat yourself, everybody. Ira's going to have us covered over at warchant.com. Stay connected over there. Ira, thanks for taking the time out, man. Appreciate the knowledge.
Thanks, man. Enjoyed it.